You didn't see this coming? No one did. Not Washington, not Brussels, not even Amsterdam. Yet, here we are. The Netherlands, one of America's closest allies, just made a decision that could shake the entire global semiconductor industry. One move. That's all it took to throw America's tech war into chaos, with consequences nobody's ready for. Under intense pressure from the US, the Netherlands made a move that could seriously disrupt global chip supply chains. ASML, the Dutch tech giant controlling roughly 90% of the world's lithography equipment market, was expected to comply with Washington's export restrictions on semiconductors to China. But as Reuters reports, ASML is still shipping deep ultraviolet DUV machines, critical for chip manufacturing, despite US objections. This move directly challenges America's push to limit China's semiconductor growth. Is the Netherlands charting its own path? Or is this just high-stakes economic brinkmanship? Former ASML CEO Peter Wennink warned that cutting China off completely might accelerate Beijing's chip development instead. Maybe he was right. China's Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation, or SMIC, has already produced 7-nanometer chips despite US sanctions. The Wall Street Journal calls this a wake-up call for Western tech dominance. If ASML keeps supplying China, is it extending China's lead or digging its own grave? Forget oil, rare earths, or AI. ASML's extreme ultraviolet lithography systems are the crown jewels of the chip race. Each machine costs over $380 million and is essential for making the most advanced semiconductors. Without EUV, China lags far behind the United States, Taiwan, and South Korea. The Biden administration, backed by the CHIPS Act, pushed the Dutch government to block all EUV sales to China. But here's the catch. ASML still dominates the market for older yet crucial DUV machines. The United States wants those blocked too, but the Netherlands isn't cooperating. Why? Because nearly 46% of ASML's 2023 revenue, over $7 billion, came from China. Cutting China off now could not only slash ASML's profits, but risk losing its global lead to Chinese competitors. At first glance, the Netherlands' choice looks like open defiance, but look deeper. It's about economic survival. Dutch leaders juggle pressure from Washington and Beijing while striving to keep ASML at the top of the tech world. The Dutch government backs ASML heavily, and letting the US dictate trade risks, turning the Netherlands into a pawn in America's economic battles. China has warned it will blacklist ASML if restrictions tighten. Meanwhile, it's stockpiling ASML machines, ramping up local lithography development, and pumping $143 billion into its semiconductor industry. The Dutch government faces a hard question. If they cave now, will they even have a customer base in 5 years? The U.S. strategy depends on one assumption. Without ASML, China can't produce next-gen chips. But a recent Semiconductor Industry Association report says China made 70% more advanced chips in 2023 than in 2022, despite sanctions. By hesitating to fully comply with Washington's demands, the Netherlands might actually be speeding up China's chip progress. Major U.S. chip makers like Intel, Nvidia, and Qualcomm are watching closely. Restrictions haven't stopped demand, they've just shifted supply chains. Chinese firms use subsidiaries and third parties to bypass bans. If ASML continues selling deep ultraviolet machines to China, is Washington's containment strategy backfiring by making China self-sufficient faster? Every time the United States tightens export controls, Beijing doubles down on investments to build its own semiconductor ecosystem. Huawei's Mate 60 Pro shocked the industry with a 7-nanometer chip once thought impossible under sanctions. China's government-backed chip fund recently injected another $45 billion into players like SMIC and Yangtze Memory Technologies, or YMTC. Dutch semiconductor expert Bert van der Velde says the longer ASML sells to China, the quicker China's homegrown chip sector will grow. If the Netherlands prioritizes short-term profits, it might be helping build the technology that eventually replaces ASML itself. This issue is already dividing the EU. France and Germany publicly support U.S. chip sale restrictions, but many European leaders are frustrated behind the scenes. The fact that American firms like Intel and AMD still get exemptions to work with China raises questions. Why should Europe sacrifice its own interests for the U.S.? European chip makers like ST Microelectronics and Infineon quietly oppose blanket bans. If the Netherlands keeps resisting, it could spark broader European pushback against U.S. trade pressure. This is no longer just about ASML. The bigger question is whether the Western alliance is fracturing over national economic priorities. China now dominates over 77% of global battery production, powering the booming electric vehicle industry. Yet its biggest hurdle remains advanced semiconductors, especially the critical chips that run EVs. That's where ASML, the Dutch tech giant, comes in. ASML is the only company worldwide able to produce extreme ultraviolet lithography machines, essential for crafting the most advanced EV chips. Despite the U.S. imposing strict export controls to stop China from getting these machines, ASML keeps delivering deep ultraviolet equipment, just fewer units. This has pushed Chinese firms like SMIC and YMTC to accelerate their own semiconductor technology development. China's electric vehicle market is now the fastest growing globally. Bloomberg forecasts domestic EV sales to hit over 10 million units in 2024, intensifying competition for Tesla, Volkswagen, and GM. If China closes the semiconductor gap, it could dominate the entire EV supply chain, not just batteries, forcing Western automakers to rely heavily on Chinese tech. The U.S. expected full cooperation from allies, but ASML's continued sales and China's aggressive push for tech independence signal growing resistance. According to the U.S. Bureau of Industry and Security, China's domestic chip production jumped 38% in 2023, surpassing earlier predictions. SMIC even managed to produce a 7-nanometer chip with DUV machines, a feat U.S. officials had deemed impossible. ASML's choice to keep selling older machines despite tighter U.S. export rules has encouraged countries like South Korea and Japan to lobby their governments to relax restrictions, fearing losing ground to China. South Korea's chip exports to China surged 41% in early 2024, showing the global chip market is shifting despite U.S. pressure. China remains ASML's second-largest customer, accounting for 46% of its sales, over $7 billion in 2023. Cutting off China entirely could create a huge revenue gap that Europe's weaker chip sector can't fill quickly. ING Bank warns that fully complying with U.S. demands might slash ASML's revenue by up to 20% over 2 years, causing layoffs and budget cuts. The Netherlands views ASML as a national treasure and is cautious about imposing a total export ban without securing beneficial trade deals. But if China perfects its own lithography machines, ASML risks not just lost profits, but losing its global tech leadership. Is ASML delaying the inevitable by selling to China or setting itself up for obsolescence? The semiconductor battle isn't isolated. It's part of a broader economic standoff between China, the U.S., and the EU. China recently restricted exports of gallium and germanium, vital chip materials, in retaliation for Western moves. Meanwhile, the U.S. is expanding the CHIPS Act with $39 billion to counter China, and the EU is pushing ahead with its own $47 billion European Chips Act. This tit-for-tat escalation shows the chip conflict is about more than tools. It's a major global economic shift. If ASML keeps selling restricted tools, the U.S. could retaliate with sanctions against European firms, similar to those imposed on Huawei suppliers. China's government-backed Big Fund 2 has pledged $45 billion to develop its own lithography tech, with early models expected by 2026. If China succeeds, major players like Taiwan's TSMC and South Korea's Samsung, reliant on ASML, could lose their edge. European chip makers like ST Micro and Infineon are growing uneasy about dependence on U.S. trade policies and urging EU leaders for more independence. This might be more than a chip war. It could split the global semiconductor industry in two, one led by China, the other by the U.S. and its allies. Europe's long-standing economic neutrality may be ending as it pushes back against Washington. China is exploiting this ASML conflict to expose fractures in the Western alliance, testing how much economic pressure allies can endure before breaking ranks. If China builds its own ASML alternative within a decade, it would not just be a tech breakthrough, it could reshape global power entirely. The Netherlands' decision, driven by short-term business interests, might end up redefining global alliances for years. If ASML loses its lead to China, this moment could be remembered as the day the West lost control over the future of computing. Think this is the ultimate showdown? Think again. A new, unexpected player is entering the stage, one neither the US nor China saw coming.